Yaakov is returning home after many years of self-imposed exile. On the way back, he's confronted by a mysterious figure. They begin to struggle. Yaakov is severely wounded by his opponent, but ultimately, Yaakov overcomes his opponent and discovers that he is none other than an angel. Yaakov then faces the angel and demands of him, "Bless me." Rachel Remen, in her book, My Grandfather's Blessings, shares with us her grandfather's understanding of the message of this story. The story comes to teach us that even in those places in life that we have suffered, that we have lost, that we have pain, even in those places, like Yaakov, we must search for the blessing. And I think this idea is what underlies the famous midrash, that every blade of grass has an angel appointed above it. And that angel strikes the grass and says, "Grow." That so often in life, the growth comes about through the blows that we've received. We don't want suffering, pain. However, when it happens, we have to have the ability to stand up and respond to it by nevertheless find how to find the blessing inside it. This story about Yaakov struggling with the angel can give us insight about the personality of Yaakov, especially vis-a-vis his brother Esav. Often Yaakov's thought of as a gentle soul. He stays at home and in some ways is almost what would be called a mama's boy, whereas Esav, he's the fighter of the family. However, a more careful look gives us a very different perspective about the personality of Yaakov and that of Esav. Yaakov, his whole life, has been surrounded around struggles. His first name, Yaakov, comes from the Hebrew Akav, ankle, which reflects the story that he's still in his mother's womb and he's already struggling to be the first to come out. His second name, the name he receives from the angel, Yisrael, is based on the Hebrew struggling with God and man and overcoming. His both names are about struggle. Yaakov is a personality who has been endowed with great physical prowess. We know in the story in last week's Parsha that the shepherds are standing around because they need all of them together to move the immense rock that covers up the opening of the well, but Yaakov single-handedly manages to move that rock. And in Yaakov's struggles, it seems that the odds are always against him. Because he was born second, he doesn't have the birthright. Because his father prefers his brother, he's not designated to receive the blessings. When he does get the blessings, he has to flee for his life, and he doesn't find peace where he runs to, but into the hands of Lavan, who cheats him at every turn. And now he's returning home only to struggle with the angel and then to have to confront his brother with 400 men coming to greet him. Yaakov has tremendous power, tremendous force. He stands through these difficulties. Ultimately, he overcomes them and achieves his destiny, the father of the 12 tribes, 12 children from whom will develop the 12 tribes of Israel. However, this fulfillment of destiny comes at a terrible price. When Yaakov, in old age, tells Paro about his life, he summarizes it as being very few days and many evil days. On the other hand, if we look at Esav, Esav is the opposite of Yaakov in many of these ways. For Esav, things come easily. He's born first, so he's designated to receive the birthright. His father loves him, so he's designated to receive the blessings. He's an Admoni, a redhead, and it seems in Tanakh being redhead was a sign of beauty, because we know the only other redhead was David, who right after the Bible telling us that David was a Admoni, tells us how attractive he was. We know that Esau is very charismatic, whereas we find Yaakov always as a loner. Esau manages to gather together 400 men to come to stand off with Yaakov. So with Esau, things come very easily, but it's easy come, it's easy go. He does not fight for things, and from his grasp, things are lost. So we have two personalities, Yaakov and Esau. Each has a dimension that the other one doesn't, and in many ways, there's even in the fulfillment of Yaakov, there's a bitterness, not to mention the lack of fulfillment for Esau. What's fascinating is that the two major wives of Yaakov Avinu, each parallel, the two sisters, Rachel and Leah, in the relationship between them, in the characteristics that each of them have, they so much parallel Yaakov and Esau. Rachel is in so many ways is similar to Esau. Not, God forbid, that there's any moral similarity between Rachel Imenu and Esau, but on other characteristics we find a lot in common. Rachel, she's designated to marry Yaakov, the equivalent of both birthright and blessing. She's beautiful, she's loved, and as the Bible scholar Robert Alter points out, the first statement we hear from Rachel is her telling Yaakov, "Give me children, otherwise I'll die," which echoes Esau's similar comment, the first comment made by Esau, "Give me food, otherwise I'll die." So there is some common aspects in personality types, and we know that Rachel also, in incidents paralleling the stories with Yaakov and Esau, loses much of her natural advantage. We know in this story, Rachel and Leah are switched under the canopy, which echoes the story of Yaakov and of Yaakov's false identity with Esau, and therefore Rachel, being the only wife of Yaakov, is now wife together with Leah, and Leah bears most of Yaakov's children. And in the same way that Yaakov buys the birthright from Esau, we have the story in which Rachel sells the privilege of being with Yaakov for some flowers to her sister Leah. And according to the Medrash, this lack of respecting the privilege of being with Yaakov is what underlied the punishment for Rachel not to be privileged to be buried by Yaakov. So we have two peers. We have Yaakov and Esau. We have Rachel and Leah. Leah, of course, is similar to Yaakov. The odds are against her. She's not beautiful. She's not designated to marry Yaakov. She must go through all these different processes, as we mentioned in the story with the flowers, the stories with the switch under the chuppah, to be able to achieve and arrive at her destiny. And the Medrash tells us that initially Yaakov was designated for Rachel and Leah for Esau. And maybe this Medrash is coming to teach us that in relationships, partners don't necessarily need someone who's like them, but they need somebody who could complement and complete them. But thinking about the story of Yaakov and his life of struggle is so reminiscent of the story of the Jewish people. Our name, Am Yisrael, comes from the story of Yaakov and the angel. Because the angel, the name that the angel gives Yaakov is Yisrael. You have struggled with God and man and have overcome. And we know that from our inception, like Yaakov Avinu, the Jewish people have constantly had to stand up and face tremendous hardship, tremendous difficulties and suffering. There's a Chinese curse that you should have an interesting life. And that curse, I'm afraid to say, has always been true for the Jewish people. So we've gone through so much. After thousands of years of exile, we finally come back to our own land, and it's not the end of the story, not the end of difficulties, but yet a new beginning. And we don't want these difficulties or sufferings. However, the ability for the Jewish people to survive and our ability to become what we have become is because of this quality of being able to find, even in suffering, the blessing. Shabbat Shalom.